Now for our roundtable with our WPTV political analyst, Mary Anna Mancuso and Brian Crowley. And we pick up where we left off with their thoughts on the challenges ahead for elections supervisors.
Well, every election is important. And, I think that we're seeing a lot of emphasis on mail-in ballots, partly because of the virus. It makes perfect sense, especially right now when you're looking at Florida, where we have this dramatic uptick in the number of people that are infected with the virus. People are going to be afraid to go to the polls. They're going to be afraid to go to things in large gathering. And the Republicans in Florida have been one of the biggest proponents of mail-in ballots. So this argument that mail-in ballots shouldn't be used is silly. And I think Wendy Sartori-Link needs to do everything she possibly can to help voters get to the polls. And I think that's what she's trying to do.
She and all of our election supervisors locally, 67 of them around Florida. Mary Anna, your thoughts?
Yes, I would have to agree with Brian. Every election is crucially important, and I can say that as we've seen in previous elections, most notably in 2018 and 2016, turning out is absolutely imperative. However, with the virus, a lot of things are going to change, and it's now more important than ever to be able to call for your vote by mail ballot. And Wendy Sartori-Link has done a fantastic job at the SOE, sending out the postcards to everybody and encouraging them to ask for their absentee ballot.
Mariana, let me start with you on this. Why has wearing a mask become such a political issue, one about civic duty, the political divide we have in this country? What we're seeing roll out in our community and elsewhere just makes me shake my head. Your thoughts?
This has completely gotten out of hand. And last weekend, my husband and I had a very similar conversation. We just didn't quite understand, the reality is wearing a mask is the socially responsible thing to do. Not only are you protecting yourself, but you're protecting the rest of your Floridians and everybody across the country. And it's really not that difficult. And if it's that big of an issue, then maybe we just really second guess about going outside and participating in things that we want to. But everybody's in such a rush to get back to the way things used to be. And the reality is we're a ways off from that. And so we have to take precautions now, especially seeing as Florida is heading into what unfortunately could be the epicenter of another wave.
Brian, it also, people say it goes to their faith in science, public health care experts, what government's telling them or not telling them. I talked to one loved one who said, in World War II, we all rationed for 4 years. He said, could you imagine asking us to do it today? It just is the same question that I put to Mariana. It just has me scratching my head, Brian.
Well, let me give you the silliness of the government can't tell you what to do. When I buy an airline ticket, I basically have made a contract with a private entity to fly me somewhere. But before that can happen, the government gets involved. The government can make me take off my shoes. It can make me take off my belt. It can go through my bags. It can look at all of my personal stuff. It can pat me down in the most personal way, and it does it every day. You can't get on the airplane without the government interfering. So this is silly. This idea that the mask compared to what you have to go through, sometimes waiting for hours in major airports to get through a line to get on your plane with TSA agents is silly. Of course, the government can tell you what to do in the case of a pandemic. And, wear a mask, folks. It's not that hard. I do it all the time.
Brian, let's turn to your favorite topic, polling. There was a New York Times poll out this week, the New York Times Siena College poll. And they said Joe Biden holding a strong lead among registered voters in 6 battleground states carried by Donald Trump in 2016, Florida among them. This poll, +6 for Biden right now, and it goes on North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and all these battleground states, but +6 in Florida. I know what you think about polling in general, but the trend lines they're arguing for the moment favor Biden in Florida.
Well, and I think that's probably true that the trend lines are probably favoring Biden right now. I'm not going to mention 2016 and the polling, but I think that viewers have heard me in the past rail about polling and my concerns about it. So instead, let me just say that if you're looking at polling, just try to be careful of what you're looking at. If you have a poll that they're showing you, and this happens all the time, where the margin of error is 4% or higher, it's probably not a very accurate poll. You also have to look at who they're polling. Are they polling likely voters? Are they polling registered voters? Or are they just polling folks? All three of those things are very different, and the most secure poll is the ones that are likely voters.
And Mariana, the same poll and the same article goes on to say that the president maintains a substantial advantage on the economy. And in late June, this thing can go a lot of different ways. Nonetheless, interesting for the moment. Mariana, thoughts?
It really is, especially for a president who has spent his election and his reelection tying himself to the economy. You know, I read something the other day in The Economist that said that our economy is no longer this bell curve, but it's looking more like a Nike swoosh. And maybe that's the case, but the reality is we haven't begun to see the full ramifications of the coronavirus pandemic on the economy in terms of the Americans that are currently without jobs, Americans that have been furloughed from their work, and things of that nature. And I think it's going to be very fascinating to see. But in terms of Joe Biden taking Florida with a +6 in this election, according to that poll, the reality is what I've been saying all along. Joe Biden has one thing that he needs to do to get to the end of the finish line on election day in his favor, and that's just to run out the clock.
And Brian, as we've talked about it frequently, as Florida goes in terms of coronavirus response, doing well, now in a dip, a lot of new concerns about a surge in cases, perhaps so goes the election for or against President Trump, for or against Joe Biden. So much rides on how people are feeling, how the economy's doing in just a few months.
Well, you know, right now, Florida is getting a lot of bad press worldwide. You have New York and Connecticut and a couple of other states, I believe, who are now saying they're going to quarantine people from Florida for 2 weeks. We did the same thing to New Yorkers. But, you know, we're going to take some really heavy hits. Tourists are not going to come. Anybody who was thinking about coming to Florida a few weeks ago has probably changed their mind. The economy is going to take a big hit, and I think we should keep in mind those stimulus checks that help people get through the early stages of the economic fallout have stopped. So I think Florida is going to take a really, really big hit with the economy in the next few weeks. God knows, I wish that wasn't true. And if this continues to the election, I think that's going to hurt Donald Trump a lot.
Healthcare, Mary Anna, Wall Street Journal just came out with an article late last week saying Trump administration asked the Supreme Court to invalidate the Affordable Care Act, that Obamacare, as many know it. Challenge to the healthcare law comes as the subtext to the article's economic impact drives millions who right now have lost jobs and may lose their coverage. Florida, the ACA or Affordable Care Act has been quite popular. It seems like a gamble when it comes to people making up minds when it comes time to vote. Yes, no.
It really is. Healthcare is definitely at the forefront of a lot of Americans, including Floridians, because as you just noted, a lot of them are out of work and they're probably going to lose their benefits. Not to mention the people that were insured under the ACA who were cancer survivors that would be listed with insurance companies, health insurance companies, as having a pre-existing condition. And to gut that program in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of a shaky economy and the uncertainty of unemployment is not necessarily the best go forth for Floridians who are looking to head to the polls in November if the president wants a re-election.